In a world filled with the deafening noise of conflict, where leadership often appears adrift in a sea of uncertainty and the future seems shrouded in an impenetrable fog of fear, there is a temptation to believe our struggles are unique. We scan the horizon for saviors, for figures of immense strength and unwavering certainty, for powerful generals and decisive rulers to carve a path through the encroaching darkness. But what if the greatest turning points in history were not orchestrated by the people we expect? What if the hand of God moves most powerfully not through the obvious channels of power, but through the vessels the world has been conditioned to ignore, to underestimate, to overlook entirely? The story of our modern anxieties, our political divisions, our cultural battles, our personal fears is not a new narrative. Its ancient archetypes are etched into the pages of Scripture, particularly within one of the most volatile, violent, and spiritually desolate periods in Israel's history, the time of the Judges. This was not an era of kings and kingdoms, but of chaos and compromise. It was defined by a grim, predictable, and soul-crushing cycle, a spiritual spiral that repeated itself with tragic regularity. First, Israel would grow complacent and forget God, turning to the idols and immoral practices of their neighbors. This was their apostasy. In response, God would remove his hand of protection, allowing a foreign power to rise and crush them underfoot. This was their subjugation. After years, sometimes decades, of brutal oppression, the people, stripped of their pride and possessions, would finally remember their God and cry out to him in anguish. This was their supplication, and in his boundless mercy, God would hear their cry and raise up a deliverer, a judge, a charismatic, spirit-filled leader to shatter their chains and restore peace. This was their salvation. Today, we will journey back into the heart of this cycle, to one of the most desperate moments in Israel's young life. It was a time when the nation was not merely defeated, but systematically dismantled and psychologically broken by a technologically superior and ruthlessly efficient enemy. Yet, this is not merely a chronicle of oppression. It is the story of how God, in his infinite and often inscrutable wisdom, chose the most improbable individual to defy an empire, to rally a broken people, and to remind them and us that his power is never constrained by human tradition or expectation. This is the story of Deborah. But what few truly grasp is that her narrative is far more than a simple account of a female leader. It is a masterclass in divine warfare, a profound revelation of the interplay between faith and fear, and a testament to the extraordinary power God conceals in the most unexpected of places. Stay with me, because the intricate details of this ancient conflict, the hidden motivations of its characters, and the shocking fulfillment of its prophecies hold a vital and illuminating message for the monumental challenges we face in our own time. To comprehend the miracle that was Deborah, you must first be gripped by the terror that was Sisera. For 20 long years, an entire generation, the people of Israel, had forgotten what it felt like to be free. The northern tribes, particularly Zebulun and Naphtali, were living under the suffocating dominion of the Canaanite king Jabin of Hazor. The name Hazor itself was a scar on the memory of Israel. It had been the seat of a mighty Canaanite confederation that Joshua, generations earlier, had conquered and burned to the ground. That Jabin had risen to power and rebuilt Hazor as his capital was a brazen statement of defiance. It was a declaration that the gods of Canaan were reclaiming their land from the God of Israel. But Jabin was a distant figure, a king behind fortified walls. The daily, grinding reality of Israel's oppression had a name and a face: Sisera. He was Jabin's commander, a military genius who ruled the fertile plains of the Jezreel Valley. And Sisera's power was absolute, rooted in a terrifying technological supremacy: 900 chariots of iron. Let us pause and fully absorb the weight of that fact. In the late Bronze Age, a period where Israelite weaponry was often rudimentary, an iron chariot was the pinnacle of military technology. It was the ancient world's main battle tank, a weapon of overwhelming shock and awe. A simple wooden chariot was a swift platform for an archer, but an iron-reinforced chariot, thundering across a plain pulled by two powerful horses, carrying a driver and two warriors armed with bows and long spears, was a mobile engine of destruction. It was designed to smash through infantry lines, to ride down fleeing soldiers, and to instill a paralyzing terror that won battles before they even began. Israel possessed no such weapons. They were an agrarian society of scattered tribes, armed with bronze-tipped spears, slings, and tools repurposed for war. Sisera's 900 iron chariots were not just a military force. They were an instrument of total psychological domination. For 2 decades, this chariot army was the guarantor of Israel's misery. The Book of Judges, in the poetic song that follows the battle, paints a devastating picture of life under Sisera's rule. Village life had ceased. Farmers were afraid to work their fields in the open plains, which were controlled by Canaanite patrols. The main highways, the arteries of commerce and travel, were abandoned. People were forced to creep along winding, hidden byways, constantly looking over their shoulders. The economy was strangled. The spirit of the people was broken. They were exiles in their own promised land, their faith eroded by the daily, tangible evidence of Sisera's power and the seeming silence of their God. They had sown the wind of apostasy, and now they were reaping the whirlwind of oppression. In this landscape of utter despair, where were the men of valor? Where were the tribal chieftains, the strong leaders who were supposed to defend the people? The biblical text is deafeningly silent on this matter. It appears the might of Sisera, the psychological weight of those 900 iron chariots, had crushed the courage of every potential male leader. But God's plan was not germinating in a war council or a secret military encampment. It was being cultivated under the gentle shade of a solitary palm tree. Located in the hill country of Ephraim, between the towns of Ramah and Bethel, a woman sat, and she judged Israel. Her name was Deborah. She held no royal title. She commanded no army. The Bible first introduces her as a prophetess, a woman who heard the voice of God with startling clarity in an age where his voice had become a distant memory for most. She was a conduit for divine wisdom. Israelites from across the tribes would undertake the perilous journey to her, seeking not military strategy, but justice in their disputes, wisdom for their lives, and, above all, a word from the Lord. The place became so renowned it was known simply as the Palm Tree of Deborah, a singular point of divine order, peace, and authority in a nation drowning in chaos and fear. She is later described in her own song as a mother in Israel. This is a title of profound significance. It speaks not of weakness, but of a fierce, protective, nurturing, and life-giving authority. In a time when the nation's fathers, its male elders and leaders, were either absent or silent, God provided a mother to hold the fractured family of Israel together, to nurture its flickering faith, and to remind it of its divine parentage. Her very existence as the leader of Israel was a radical and potent statement from God himself. When the vessels I am expected to use are empty or unwilling, I will pour out my spirit and my authority upon whomever I choose. Then one day, under that palm tree, the season for rendering judgments in small disputes was over. The season for rendering God's judgment upon an empire had arrived. The Lord spoke to Deborah, not with a gentle prompting, but with a clear, direct, and earth-shaking command. The 20 years of affliction were at an end. The cries of his people had ascended to the heavens. The time for deliverance was now. Deborah's role was precise. She was to be the mouthpiece for the true commander of Israel's armies. She sent a message to a man named Barak, the son of Abinoam, who lived in Kedesh, a town in the northern tribe of Naphtali. The message she sent was not her own opinion or a piece of strategic advice. It was a direct quotation, a divine military order. The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Go, take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead them to Mount Tabor. I will lead Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands. Let us dissect the brilliance and the audacity of this command. It was not a vague promise of help. It was a detailed battle plan. Mount Tabor, a distinctive dome-shaped mountain rising abruptly from the Jezreel Valley, was a strategic masterstroke. Its steep slopes would render Sisera's chariot force completely useless. The command was to gather an army there. But the promise was even more breathtaking. God himself would act as the agent of deception. He would lure Sisera, the master tactician, into the perfect kill zone, the valley of the Kishon River. And then, God promised, he would deliver the entire enemy force into Barak's hands. It was a promise of total, unconditional victory issued from the throne of the universe. Barak, a man of Naphtali, a military figure living at the epicenter of the oppression, received this divine summons. He certainly knew of Deborah. Her fame as a prophetess was widespread. He knew this was a word from God. And yet, 20 years of living under the shadow of those iron chariots had carved deep ravines of doubt into his soul. He had seen their power. He had counted their numbers. He had witnessed their brutal efficiency. God's promise was a glorious sound in his ears, but the thunder of Sisera's chariots was a terrifying roar in his heart. His reply to Deborah is one of the most honest and revealing statements in the entire book of Judges. It is the cry of a man caught between the command of his faith and the logic of his fear. He said to her, "If you go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go." But Nain, Sema, for centuries, this has been labeled as simple cowardice, the act of a general who needed a woman to hold his hand. But this is a shallow reading. Let us look deeper into the heart of a man on the precipice. Barak's faith was not absent, but it was wounded. He needed more than just a disembodied promise. In an age before the temple, before the Ark of the Covenant was a central presence, the recognized prophet of God was the most tangible, visible symbol of God's presence and approval on earth. Barak was not necessarily doubting God's power. He was terrified of moving without a clear sign of God's presence with him. He was saying, "I believe the message, but I need the messenger. I need the vessel of God's authority on that battlefield, as a living banner, as a constant reminder to me and my terrified soldiers that God is in this." His was not a rejection of God's call, but a desperate plea for divine assurance in a human form. If this deeper look at the complex heart of a biblical hero is giving you a new perspective, and if you're seeing how the Bible honestly portrays the struggle between faith and fear, take a moment to give this story a like. Your engagement helps us continue to mine these profound truths for a world that needs to know it's okay to be both fearful and faithful. Deborah's response was immediate, a perfect blend of maternal understanding and prophetic rebuke. She saw the need behind his fear, but she also saw the flaw in his faith that needed to be addressed. "Certainly I will go with you," she said, agreeing to be the living symbol of God's presence that he and his army required. But then came the prophetic consequence, the price of his hesitation. "Nevertheless, the road on which you are going will not lead to your glory, for the Lord will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman." In that moment, Barak surely assumed she was speaking of herself. He probably thought, "So be it. I will get the victory, but she will get the credit." It was a price he was willing to pay. The glory of the victory was secondary to the survival and freedom of his people. He had no way of knowing how literally, how shockingly, and how violently those prophetic words would be fulfilled. And so Barak obeyed. With Deborah at his side, a constant source of divine authority, he issued the call to arms. The tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, who had borne the brunt of Sisera's cruelty, responded. 10,000 men, picture them, farmers leaving their plows, shepherds leaving their flocks, men who had spent their lives hiding in the hills, now marching towards an open confrontation with an imperial war machine. They gathered and ascended Mount Tabor, their hearts a turbulent storm of adrenaline, hope, and raw terror. From the summit, they could see the entire expanse of the Jezreel Valley, the stage for their potential liberation or their certain annihilation. Word of this insurrection quickly reached Sisera. He must have received the news with a mixture of arrogance and delight. A rabble of Israelite peasants, 10,000 strong, gathered on a mountain. They had trapped themselves. He would make an example of them that would not be forgotten for a century. He mobilized his entire overwhelming force, all 900 iron chariots, and a vast army of infantry to support them. He marched them to the base of Mount Tabor, arraying them along the banks of the Kishon River. He was setting a magnificent trap. Let the Israelites come down from their perch. The moment they set foot on the valley floor, his chariots would charge, and the slaughter would be swift and total. In his mind, the battle was already over. The stage was set. 10,000 men, with little more than courage, clinging to a high mountain, looking down upon a vast, disciplined army, equipped with the most terrifying weapons of the age. The strategic impasse was absolute. Barak's men were safe on the mountain, but they could not win from there. Sisera's army was dominant on the plain, but they could not assault the steep slopes. Every ounce of human military wisdom would have screamed at Barak, "Wait, do not go down there. It is suicide." Then, at the peak of this unbearable tension, Deborah turned to Barak. Her voice was not the voice of a strategist, but of an oracle. This was the moment of destiny. She did not say, "I think we should attack now." She declared, "Go, for this is the day in which the Lord has delivered Sisera into your hand. Has not the Lord gone out before you?" It was a command that defied all logic. It was a call to step off the cliff of safety and into the abyss of apparent annihilation, armed with nothing but a promise. The key was in her final question, "Has not the Lord gone out before you?" She was reminding him that the real battle had already been won in the heavenlies. God had already marched forth. Their job was not to win the victory, but to collect it. In a staggering act of faith, Barak obeyed. He gave the command, the shofars sounded, and 10,000 Israelites surged down the slopes of Mount Tabor, a human avalanche pouring into the valley of death. Sisera, seeing them coming, would have smiled. He gave the order to his charioteers. The lines of iron chariots lurched forward, the ground beginning to tremble under the hooves of nearly 2,000 horses. The end was seconds away, and in that moment, the God of Israel went to war. The Bible's prose account is concise. The Lord routed Sisera and his entire army. But the Song of Deborah in the following chapter gives us the breathtaking poetic details of this divine ambush. From the heavens the stars fought. From their courses they fought against Sisera. The river of Kishon swept them away. The ancient river, the river Kishon. This was no ordinary thunderstorm. This was a supernatural meteorological assault, a cataclysmic downpour, divinely timed and divinely aimed, erupted from the heavens. The stars themselves, symbols of heavenly power, seemed to be warring against the Canaanites. The hard-packed earth of the Jezreel Valley, the perfect racetrack for chariots, instantly transformed into a deep, sucking quagmire. The Kishon River, for most of the year a gentle stream, swelled into a raging, flash-flooding torrent. In an instant of divine, poetic justice, Sisera's greatest strength became his most fatal liability. The 900 iron chariots were now worthless. Their heavy wheels sank to their axles in the thick mud. They became immobile, inescapable iron traps. The powerful war horses screamed and struggled, tangled in their harnesses, drowning in the mud and the rising waters. The entire Canaanite army, a force built around the speed and power of its chariot corps, collapsed into utter chaos. Into this chaos stormed the Israelite infantry. Light on their feet, unburdened by heavy armor or sinking vehicles, they fell upon the trapped and terrified Canaanite soldiers. The mighty imperial war machine was being systematically and brutally dismantled by mud, by water, and by the omnipotent hand of the God of heaven. Sisera, the fearsome commander, the symbol of unbeatable power, watched this supernatural destruction of his army with dawning horror. His power was an illusion, his invincibility was a myth. In a final, desperate act of self-preservation, he committed the ultimate soldier's sin. He abandoned his men. He leaped from his magnificent, now useless chariot and fled the battlefield on foot. He ran for his life, alone and disgraced, his empire dissolving in the mud behind him. Barak and his exultant army pursued the remnants of the Canaanite force to the very gates of their cities, and the Bible records with grim finality, not a man was left. But the prophecy was not yet complete. The thread of Deborah's words still hung in the air. The Lord would sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. Exhausted, soaked, and terrified, Sisera ran north, his mind racing for a place of refuge. He knew of a man named Heber the Kenite. The Kenites were a clan of nomadic metal workers, descendants of Moses' father-in-law, Jethro. They had a long history of friendly relations with Israel, but they were not Israelites. They were a neutral party. Crucially, the biblical text informs us that this particular clan chief, Heber, had broken away from the other Kenites and established a treaty of peace with King Jabin of Hazor. Sisera was running to the tent of a political ally, a safe house. He staggered into the Kenite encampment and was met by Heber's wife, a woman named Jael. She saw the most wanted man in the kingdom, a desperate fugitive, arrive at her doorstep. She had a choice to make. She could turn him away, she could hide him, or she could do something else entirely. She went out to meet him, her face a mask of welcome. "Come, my lord, come right in," she said with reassuring words. "Don't be afraid." Her invitation was a balm to his shattered nerves. He entered her tent. In the culture of the ancient Near East, the woman's tent was a sacred space of sanctuary. To enter it under her invitation was to be guaranteed protection. Jael amplified this sense of security with every action. When Sisera, parched from his flight, asked for water, she opened a skin of milk, a richer, more luxurious, and more sleep-inducing drink. She covered him with a heavy rug, concealing him from view and offering him warmth and comfort. The mighty Sisera, the tyrant who had held Israel in his iron grip, was now as helpless as a child, completely dependent on the hospitality of a woman. He gave her one last order to stand at the entrance of the tent and lie to anyone who came asking for him, and then, utterly exhausted, he succumbed to a deep and profound sleep. This was Jael's moment. She was a woman in an impossible position. Her husband had a formal peace treaty with Sisera's king. To harm a guest under her protection was a violation of every sacred law of hospitality. To kill him was an act of political treason that could result in the annihilation of her family. But in the quiet of that tent, with the embodiment of Israel's oppression lying helpless before her, Jael made a choice that would echo through eternity. She would not honor a human treaty with a doomed and wicked king. She would align herself and her household with the living God of Israel. She possessed no sword, no spear. She used the tools of her trade, the implements of her daily life. Moving with silent purpose, she took a long, sharpened tent, pegged the stake that secured her home to the earth, and a workman's hammer. With a resolve that is both terrifying and awesome, she approached the sleeping general. She placed the point of the stake against his temple, and with the hammer, she drove it through his skull and pinned his head to the very ground he had once dominated. The great oppressor, who for 20 years had been the source of Israel's nightmares, was killed not by a warrior in the heat of battle, but in his sleep by a woman with household tools. A short time later, Barak arrived at the encampment, hot on Sisera's trail. Jael walked out to meet him, her task completed. "Come," she said, her voice steady. "I will show you the man you're looking for." She led the victorious general of Israel into her tent, and there he saw him, Sisera, the object of his fear for 2 decades, lying dead, his head nailed to the floor. In that stunning, gory tableau, Deborah's prophecy was fulfilled to the letter. The ultimate glory, The final, decisive stroke of the victory did not go to Barak the general. It was delivered, as God had ordained, into the hand of a woman. The war was over. The victory was total and miraculous. And what followed was not a parade or a political summit, but an explosion of worship. The 5th chapter of Judges preserves for us the song of Deborah and Barak, one of the oldest and most magnificent poems in the entire Bible. It is a theological masterwork, reflecting on the meaning of what had just transpired. It roars with praise for God, who arose from his throne to shatter the enemy. It blesses the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali, who risked their very lives on the heights of the field. With biting sarcasm, it rebukes the tribes who stayed home, Reuben, who sat contemplating among his sheep pens, Dan and Asher, who lingered by their ships and coastal towns. They played it safe, and in doing so, they missed their opportunity to be part of God's mighty work of redemption. And in the heart of this triumphant song, the highest honor is bestowed upon the most unlikely hero of all. Most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Canaanite. Most blessed of tent-dwelling women. Her shocking, violent act is not condemned. It is celebrated as an act of supreme righteousness. A decisive blow struck for the justice of God. The result of this incredible saga: the land had peace for 40 years. An entire generation grew up without fear, without the thunder of iron chariots, without the oppression of a foreign tyrant. It was a peace purchased not by human might, but by a prophetess's obedience to the voice of God, by a general's willingness to swallow his pride and conquer his fear, and by a homemaker's stunning courage to act when destiny arrived at her tent door. The story of Deborah is a powerful and enduring testament to a God who delights in overturning human expectations. He is not bound by our traditions, our power structures, or our prejudices. He raised up a woman to be the spiritual and political leader of his people. He used her voice to ignite the faith of a hesitant warrior. He commanded a storm to systematically dismantle a superior military force, and he used the hand of another woman, in the sanctity of her home, to deliver the final, fatal blow. So what does this ancient story, born from an age of chaos and faith, say to us today, in our own age of anxiety? It declares that leadership in the kingdom of God is not determined by gender, status, or strength, but by one's attentiveness to his voice. It thunders that our most intimidating obstacles, our 900 iron chariots, are nothing before a God who commands the very stars in their courses to fight for his people. And it whispers a message of profound hope, that even when our faith falters, as Barak's did, a single, courageous step of obedience is all God requires to unleash his world-altering power. This story is a timeless call to listen for God's voice in the most unexpected people, to face our fears with the assurance that he has gone before us, and to have the courage to act, knowing that sometimes the most powerful weapon in the world is the faith to use what is already in our hand. What aspect of this profound story, Deborah's unwavering leadership, Barak's honest struggle with fear, or Jael's shocking and decisive action, speaks most powerfully to the challenges you are facing in your life? Share your reflections in the comment box below. This is not just an ancient story. It is a living word, and your insights are a valuable part of our collective journey in understanding it. If this deep and detailed exploration of the Deborah narrative has ignited a new passion for the hidden depths of the Bible, please show your support by giving this account a thumbs up and sharing it with others. Your engagement signals to us that you desire more content that unearths the powerful, life-changing truths of Scripture. And if you are ready to uncover the story of another unlikely hero, a man who was the weakest in his clan and was called by God from a place of hiding and fear, click the video you see on your screen right now. Gideon's secret strategy, how God turns fear into a weapon. The signs God showed him reveal a divine pattern that is just as relevant today. In times like these, understanding the ways of God is more essential than ever. Blessings.